Today we are talking about communities and the interactions within them. So when two organisms interact, it is a relationship. There is some sort of relation happening. And so here, when we talk about relationships and communities, we want to remember the word niche. Remember that a niche is something that an animal or an organism does um, that is its job in its ecosystem. And so oftentimes this has to do with how they get their food, if it is an animal and it is eating. And so if we look at this picture here, we can see that the job or the niche of the bird is to eat the worms, which is going to keep the worm population down. But the job of the worms is to move the soil around to keep it so that the soil doesn't get too compact and the roots of the grass can set and organisms can survive in the land. And so that is the job of the worm or the niche of the worm. And so the way that organisms interact is oftentimes impacted by what their niche is. And so one type of relationship that we're going to look at is a symbiotic relationship. And a symbiotic relationship is one where two species live very closely together. And so if we look at the word symbiotic, the prefix sym means together. And so this is where two organisms live closely together. So sym means together, bio, life, so living together. And so in these relationships where they live together, one organism has to benefit. At least one organism has to benefit. It takes work to live together, and I'm sure you know what it's like to have family members and live in the same home, and sometimes it's a lot of work and it's frustrating, and you wouldn't do it if it wasn't better, if it didn't make your life better. You wouldn't put that work in order to make that relationship happen if it didn't make your life better. And so remember that in these symbiotic relationships, it's work to live together, but they do it, organisms do this because it makes their life better in one way or another. And so there are three of these symbiotic relationships: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. And so we're going to study how each of these are different. All three of these are types of symbiotic relationships. In a mutualistic relationship, this is where both species benefit. They're both affected positively. So here, if these little plus and minus signs, or these plus signs, represent the two species that are interacting, since they're both impacted positively, we're going to use two plus signs. And so an example of mutualism is the sea anemone and the clownfish. So the clownfish is going to inhabit the anemone, which protects the clownfish because they have little stinging tentacles that are going to hurt predators of the clownfish. And the clownfish is going to fight off predators of the anemone. They're going to protect the anemone so that they can protect their home. And so these two form a mutual relationship where they help each other. The next symbiotic relationship that we're talking about is parasitism. And these are the icky things in life. We're talking about ticks and tapeworms. So parasites live in or on a host. And so notice here that we have one is affected positively. So the tick is going to live on its host, or it's going to feed on the blood of the host. So it's going to be affected positively, but the host is impacted negatively. So we use a negative sign. And you may think that, when we talked about a hare and the lynx relationship, the hare might be impacted negatively and the lynx is impacted positively because it gets dinner. But that is a different type of relationship. Parasites generally weaken, but do not kill their host. They want to continue to be able to take for a longer period of time. So it doesn't make good sense to kill your host, then you'll have nowhere to live, or then you won't have any more blood to eat. So parasites generally weaken but do not kill their hosts. And that's different from a predator-prey relationship where one organism intends to kill and consume the other animal. Our final and third symbiotic relationship is called commensalism. And this, we use a positive sign. So one, remember, one has to be impacted positively. And the other, we're going to use an equal sign because they're not really helped nor harmed. They're kind of unaffected. So we have the example of a barnacle and a whale. So a barnacle is a sea organism that when you're stepping on rocks, these can slice your foot. They open and close right here. And in their larval stages, so here's the life cycle of a barnacle. In the early stages of life, it is plankton. It gets moved around in the ocean. And it looks for a surface. It needs to have a surface to attach to so that it can grow into this adult phase here where it can reproduce. And if you're on the coast, if you're a barnacle and you're living near the land, well, that's great. There's plenty of surface. However, if you're in the middle of the ocean, there's large, long periods of time where there's going to be no surfaces. And so when a whale swims by, that is a surface, and a barnacle can attach to it. And then it can move into this adult form and reproduce, pass on its genes to the next generation, which is the goal, to pass on your genes to reproduce. And so the barnacle is very much helped by the whale. The whale is not helped nor harmed. It just has some barnacles on it. As far as we know, the whale, it does not bother the whale. So we have some other relationships that we're going to talk about. One of those relationships we've already mentioned is the predator-prey relationship. And this is when one organism captures and feeds on another. So remember that this is not a parasitic relationship because the intention is to kill and to consume. So this is a predator-prey relationship. Another relationship we find in communities is herbivory. So that is when a consumer, like a deer right here, is going to feed on producers. And so that is where we get the word herbivores. And our final concept that we're going to talk about are keystone species. These are very important species in a community. If we look at our food web here, we can see how some organisms have more connections to other organisms. So if we were to, oftentimes our top predators are keystone species. If something were to happen to that keystone species, to the top predator, or here, the mouse, there's a lot of connections to that mouse. If that population were to collapse and we had no mice, well then this community would be very heavily impacted. So it has lots of connections and it carries a lot of weight in the community because a lot of other organisms depend on it. And so if you look here, a good way to remember this is a keystone. If you've ever seen a stone arch bridge, so this would be the bridge and these are the stones. At the very top of a stone arch bridge, you have a keystone, which holds all of those stones in place. And so if you were to remove that keystone, everything else would collapse. And this would be, and so therefore this stone is very important in holding everything together. And so those are our notes for relationships in communities. Have a great day.